Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining me in Confessions of Unfit. Today's episode is Confessions of an Unfit Entrepreneur, and I'm Talim Badawi, and I'm your host. And I hope I can bring some value to today's topic. I know that this is a platform where we turn flaws into applause, where it allows us to really be unapologetically ourselves, where it allows us to challenge the narratives that we have in our minds that usually can work and can become a glass ceiling that stops us from being, I guess, our better selves, better version of ourselves, whichever way that you would like to whichever way you would like to share it. Now, let me start with a confession of my own. I don't think being an entrepreneur was ever something that I really knew that I wanted to do per se. I knew that I love being an independent thinker. I knew that I love being creative. In my previous life when I was in marketing, because as I may have shared with you in a previous episode, I do come from a business background, even though now I'm not in the corporate world. I do work with corporations, with executives and whatnot in a coaching space, in a training, organizational development space. Now, when I have to say the biggest confession wasn't that I believed that I could be an entrepreneur, and I didn't really completely grasp the idea of what it means to be an entrepreneur, to be in the first place. I always knew that there was a desire in my mind of being my own boss and making my own rules, and that's on a very, very primitive level. You can, even if you've probably known me a little bit more, you would know that this is something that, I may have shared with you, that this is something since I was a little girl I've wanted. When I would play, I wouldn't really play with dolls as much. I mean, I played with dolls. I played as a teacher. I played as a mom. But part of the child's play was being a manager, owning your own business, running your own company, which was really awesome, but I had no clue what it meant. So fast forward decades down the line, it really was never the idea in my mind. I always believed you had to be a specific personality to be that. You had to have certain qualifications, certain personalities that you needed to have. It's not something that you can acquire. It's something that you're born with, I guess, if that makes sense. So the idea of being an entrepreneur was never something like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I'm going to be doing. I think it was something that I sort of fell on and probably years after I started my own business, I probably now tell people, yeah, I'm an entrepreneur, or, I say it with a fuller mouth, if that makes sense. But yeah, and honestly, and I started the Executive Monk in 2020, and boy, was that a story to tell. And I actually learned that I love telling that story. I always start, when I have to introduce myself, I always start with the idea of, let me tell you how I started. And usually the line that I go on with is, while the people were locking down, while the people were closing their businesses, I was opening my doors saying, hey, we're starting our business. So I was lucky enough and fortunate enough to have good clients, and clients that were happy to continue and were able to continue working despite the pandemic, despite the lockdown and whatnot. So I'm always and forever grateful for these opportunities and for these individuals. And I know many of them have probably gone to bigger and better things in their life, and so have I, but they will always be in my gratitude and my thoughts and my prayers. So yeah, this is how I started. And I started it exactly. I launched my company exactly 3 days before we went into lockdown. Talk about timing, but hey, it is what it is, and it's a fun story to tell. And you know what? Here we are, 4 years later, going, thankfully, knock on wood, going strong. But what is the unfitness here? What is it that we're talking about here? And how did I navigate through the days and the nights of uncertainty, of not knowing whether I'm doing it right, not knowing whether this is the thing I should be doing, and kind of the inner demons that sort of wake you up at night or freak you out during the day and make you question and doubt yourself and doubt your abilities to whether you can and you have what it takes. And it really pushed me into reflecting long and hard on what does it mean to be an entrepreneur, but more so, what does it mean to be successful in what you're doing? Because some people will have this idea that to be successful, you have to maybe you have to grow in a certain way, or you have to be making a certain amount of money, and so on and so forth. And that, I think where my introspection started to come in, where I started to think I need to think differently. Otherwise, I'm going to drive myself crazy and I'll drive people around me crazy and so on and so forth. So that was actually kind of a fun period of time to go through. So if you are in my circle of friends, and if you are one of the people that I probably ran to crying, telling them, I don't know if I could do this anymore, I am, again, also forever grateful. I love you guys. You've always been my rock. So just wanted to say that. But I think what I want to bring our conversation to today, more so around the main components that I think we question ourselves when it comes to running our own business. So some of the narratives that I always had and in my mind, and again, sort of like the model that you had to fit into, otherwise you can't call yourself an entrepreneur, you can't call yourself a successful entrepreneur. And that was very interesting, and it was a defining and life altering moments, if I want to say. And they were a series of moments. It was never just a one-time thing. And trust me, it's always a new thing coming up to make you question and make you doubt your abilities, make you doubt whether you can or cannot do it. And again, a lot of people believe outside of the entrepreneurship arena. I want to say that, and I could be wrong, but please, if I am, apologize. I'm just, again, speaking my opinion and speaking my thoughts. This is not based on research or data. This is about bringing out, the mindset and and challenging the internal narrative, not really bringing evidence based, but it's something that is starting that dialogue. Yeah. So one of the things that I always started to question myself with was, do I have what it takes to call yourself really an entrepreneur or a successful business person? You had to possibly have a certain amount of capital. You have to have a certain number of employees. After a certain, they always say like, oh, 9 out of 10 businesses fail in the first year and whatnot. And you start to live with these demons that are constantly with you. And I just didn't understand. So for the longest while, even though I would say, oh yeah, I have my own business, or I run my own practice, or I say that in my head, I'd be lying if I told you that's exactly what I thought. For me, I just thought, hey, I'm freelancing this. It's just the only difference I'm doing is I have a proper, business license, and I'm operating legally with a company name as opposed to a freelance license. Because yet again, I would fall under the category of a solopreneur. So that concept, that idea of what does it take for you to call yourself a successful business person? What does it take for you to call yourself an entrepreneur? What does it take to call yourself an innovator, and so on and so forth, started to take a toll on me. And eventually I had to break it down into 3 or 4 different categories, which I feel help me challenge the narratives and help me keep going. Because, one of the things that pushes entrepreneurs to stop and quit and give up and so on and so forth, in many cases, it's the idea of, can I do this? Am I worthy enough to do this? Am I good enough to do this? Am I even, I don't know if you've heard the term like, oh my God, what if I'm a fraud? Or, or the classic term of imposter syndrome, right? Many of us experience that because we want to push ourselves to do something, and we want to push ourselves to deliver something. And in our mind, when we think of starting a business, I think, at least I'll speak for myself, in the moments that I allowed myself to dream, I always asked myself, what is it? What kind of legacy do I want to have? And who am I mirroring myself against? And who's sort of my a role model in my field of business. And for the longest while, the person I always wanted to be like was Tony Robbins, because in my field, he is somebody to look up to, quite successful, multiple companies, the amount, obviously quite, everybody knows who he is, popular, whatever it is that you want to call it. He's successful on so many different levels. So, when you start thinking about starting something, I think your brain dreams really big, which is exactly what you want to be doing. But your brain dreams really big, and your planner self believes that you can do this. I think sometimes we forget to invite to this dream party the doer in ourselves. And then when the planner self comes in to tell the doer self, basically, hey, we've come up with this plan and we're going to do this, the doer self goes, I did not say we can do that. And it's like, I didn't agree to any of this. So it's actually kind of fun. There's a specific person that I always tell him, it's so much fun living inside my head sometimes. So yeah, this is the conversation that goes on my head sometimes. So I started to actually have to ask myself, really, like, okay, dream big, that's amazing. I did come to the conclusion that I should not mirror myself against anyone. It would be great to be that successful, but I'm not going to take the same path they took, because obviously my journey is different from theirs. So that was by itself is a huge revelation. But I think the biggest turning point that I have come across, and the biggest aha moment for me, and I wish I had a light bulb, because I would have literally put it over my head right now. The biggest aha moment was for me to define success. And how would I define it? And I'll tell you what I mean by that. Because, see, if you are an employee, you might define success in I found a job, I stayed in the job long enough, I am progressing in my job, so my performance is I'm being appraised in a certain way. Obviously, I'm making more money, I'm getting better promotions, and maybe I'm getting better offers, and it's sort of like a stepping stone to the next level up. Being an entrepreneur is a completely different ball game, because one thing that I say, especially in my kind of business, in my kind of field, being a coach, being a trainer, a lecturer, all of that, it's sort of like the hour that you're not working is an hour that you're not being paid for, right? If we think about it, if I'm bringing it down to a lowest common denominator, if that makes sense, right? So then you start to look at, okay, some months are great, some months are okay, some months are not so much. So you realize that maybe for me and other businesses like yourselves, have a cyclical, kind of a cyclical frame or a rhythm, right? And in that case, it becomes, right, so, how many months are maybe not as good as other months, which months are better, and so on and so forth. And therefore, defining success might not be as easy and straightforward as, oh, I'm doing better because this month was better than last month. If we're only allocating it based on maybe number of clients, maybe profit or revenue that you bring in, and so forth. So I realized in my journey, and again, I speak to you, I challenged the narrative in my head. So in my journey, I couldn't assess my success based on the number of clients that I have, or the number of, the amount of projects that I'm part of, and so on and so forth. Yes, those came in a little bit later. But if you are in the coaching business, you always have to give the value and the service before you get the return on investment. And this is something that we see a lot. And this is something that I usually tell aspiring coaches to keep an eye for, again, because they need to redefine the concept of success. So what and how did I redefine the concept of success? I realized that the concept of success for me Okay, so you guys might disagree, but the concept of success for me that I had to redefine, and that became my unfitness, but interestingly enough, became my strong moment, my superpower, is I realized that my success was very much dependent on how much I worked on myself, how much I developed myself. And and based on that, the more I realized that as a professional, I started to develop myself more. I started to grow my skills more. I started to increase and improve on my network better. I started to deal with the internal demons in my head that were constantly, or, we call them in the business, your inner critic, right? That voice in your head that keeps telling you can't and you won't and you don't even bother and don't take that step forward and don't take the risk and all of that. The more I started to overcome these, and the more I started to get just a little bit, little bit more comfortable being outside of my comfort zone, the more I realized that that was the essence of my success. Because if I had to judge myself based on what how much business I brought in, it became a very, especially in the beginning, it became a very topsy-turvy kind of a journey. It became quite unnerving, anxious in some point at some points in time, because you can do the work, but at the end of the day, you also have to realize that during, especially if I speak after COVID or during COVID, the times were a little bit harder. Working with people was kind of getting people to see the value in self development and taking on the business, taking on such projects that in their mind were non-essential projects. Then perhaps it wasn't something that they were, that they wanted to do. So therefore, you would have to ask yourself, oh, what am I doing wrong? Am I doing it wrong? Should I quit while I'm ahead? All of that. So the more I started to focus on success as a personal journey and a personal development, and developing myself further and further and further, making myself a better coach, a better person. I started to go into more continuing education, doing things that helped me actualize and really bring to life my purpose. The more I realized that that was what was making me more successful. And for me, that defined my success. Now, I want to say, thankfully, this particular formula worked well for me, because, based on that, I started, of course, I started to get more exposure. In some cases, some friends of mine felt like, I had something to offer, and then they offered me opportunities to show up on, to go on TV and share my expertise and so on and so forth. And of course, when people take a chance on you, like your network takes a chance on you to do something like that, you always want to thank them and show them gratitude by being better, by continuously working on yourself, by making sure that they've put their trust in the right person. And that was always a great motivator for me. So that for me was the definition of how I can decide and I can really judge myself. And it couldn't be a validating exercise, an external validating exercise. It had to be an internal exercise. And that, again, is not an easy thing to do, because as an entrepreneur, and you guys who are entrepreneurs out there or solopreneurs out there might empathize with that and might relate, it gets a little bit lonely, because when you are working on your own, you don't really have a lot of people to interact with and to share with, and sort of like get that evidence-based validation. You just have people around you say, oh, they see what things look like on the outside, and they think you're doing a great job, and you thank them for it, and it matters, and it's great to hear that from others. But it's you looking at what you're doing and what you're bringing forward. So that for me was the biggest step forward in understanding what it took for me to consider myself a successful business person, a successful executive coach, a successful entrepreneur or solopreneur. That's what it was for me. Now, add to it that one of the demons that I had to struggle with is, oh no, 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 I'm a solopreneur. I don't know if I have it in me to work, to have employees, to bring people over. I don't know if, and that becomes the next bridge that sometimes you need to go through as a person, to basically say, can I not? Should I not? Do I have what it takes, or don't I have what it takes? So it's just these things that is so important to think about. And I guess what I'm trying to say here, particularly for those that are trying to would love to start their own business, or if you went the lighter route and said, I'd like to be my own boss, basically whatever that means. What I want to say to you is, do it. Take a chance on you. It's very, very important to try that. It does not require a certain set of individual to do that. You're not born an entrepreneur, or you're not born an employee. You just have to gain more skills. And if there are certain things that you're not sure how to do, I think it's great to surround yourself by individuals who will support you, who will sit with you, who will become consults to you, confidants. Perhaps find a network of other business SME individuals, or other entrepreneurs, or other startups and whatnot. So I know there's so many different models, and the idea behind, especially when it comes to entrepreneurship, I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is, you could find a lot of entrepreneurs in the employment field, in the full-time, in the corporate field. You'll find a lot of entrepreneurs that don't have their own business, or they don't believe they have their own business, or they're doing it differently. They're just freelancers. The bottom line is, being an entrepreneur is, I think, a mindset, is understanding that you have an idea, or you want to deliver some form of value, and you're going to do it in whichever way or method it could be. One small example, and I think, again, this is one of those things that you realize much, much later, when you're a lot more what you call it, more mature, that you start to see the world less like a black and white and more of a gray area. For example, I know that my paternal grandfather, used to have a convenience store, in Lebanon, and my maternal grandfather used to also do a lot of work, for himself. So these are entrepreneurs. Just because they are not seeking to build an empire, it doesn't make them any less entrepreneurial than others. One of my best friend, teaches privately, and that is entrepreneurial in itself, because you're managing yourself, you're doing things on your own, and to be an entrepreneur, it does not necessarily mean you have to fit a certain criteria, and you have to be a certain person, and your company needs to look a certain way, and so on and so forth. I believe being an entrepreneur is being an independent thinker. I believe being an entrepreneur, being innovative. I think it requires a certain comfort in risk taking. I think it requires a certain comfort in being outside of your comfort zone. And it just becomes one of those things that, very much like, I want to say, very much like parenting, where you have to figure it out as you go, and you also would want to grow based on how big your entrepreneurial space is. So again, I've been the founder of the Executive Monk for the last, I think, 4 years now. Yeah, for the last 4 years. I'm looking at my calendar, by the way. For the last 4 years. And that is me being a solopreneur. Now, in the next year or 2024, like if you've heard me say this, if you've read any of my posts, you'll know that for me, 2024 is living outside of my comfort zone. So, boy, has it been very, very uncomfortable. Let me just tell you that. But the idea behind, getting outside of our comfort zone is to understand what more do we have to give. So, sort of the idea of deciding to, go out on a limb and take a leap of faith on myself and starting this podcast was one of those things that I decided I wanted to do. And, hopefully more things to come along the way. So my final thoughts for you is when you want to embark on a journey, on a project that you want to independently do, I believe that shows you that you have the skills to be that you have the skills to be entrepreneurial. You have the skills to be that independent thinker, that innovator who is going to come up with a new idea and is going to find a way and is going to do it, and hopefully eventually you make money from it and you become successful and so on and so forth. And perhaps that to me is the biggest narrative I would love to see challenged, because I would love to see more people taking a bigger chance on themselves. I would love to see more people deciding to redefine the concept of success, to expand beyond making money, or to expand beyond building an empire, or to expand beyond, being a, what do you call it? A Fortune 500 company. It doesn't have to be that. It really doesn't have to be that. Put aside for you a plan on what you want to achieve, and try to make this plan go beyond just tangible things. Decide what you want and go after it. And I'm not trying to say it in the way like, oh, like you can be everything you want to be. I think you can, as long as we have, and if as long as we are immortal and we have all the time in the world and all the energy in the world. But let's face it, I think sometimes we don't have that, and many times we don't have that. But the idea behind is decide what you want to do, focus on what you want to do, and put a plan. If you have to take somebody along the road with you, take them along the road with you, in the sense of they might have something to, service, a value to provide, and you might have a value to provide, and you don't necessarily have to be 100% in collaboration with one another, but kind of the influence of each other helps. And and this is one thing that I found to be quite a invigorating, is to JV with different projects, to work with different projects. So, with different individuals, to have the privilege to work with different individuals or interact with different individuals, and see that even though they're not a core part of your business, they are an integral part of your growth and your own development. And therefore you see yourself growing and you see them grow with you. So those are very, very important, points that I felt are important to bring to the narrative, to challenging the narrative of what it takes to be an entrepreneur. It's not a specific definition. It's not a specific blueprint at all. But if I have to tell you what were the two major ingredients that you have to have in order to build a really healthy, and I mean a really healthy foundation for an entrepreneur and really an individual, I would say make sure that you have, that you've adopted a real growth mindset, and you've worked as much as you can on your emotional intelligence. And I know these may sound like such old concepts, but they are really basic, and they are very important and quite integral, because with a growth mindset, everything becomes about growth and development and whatnot. You are less likely to allow your ego to interfere in your own growth and development. Your emotional intelligence allows you to regulate when the moments come that you are not feeling 100% yourself, and that will happen a lot. You might decide, you might have an idea of a project that you want to do, and then all of a sudden, the minute you launch that project, it doesn't give you the results that you wanted or that you hoped or that you envisioned. And it might, for that split of a moment, it might actually crush your soul. Dramatic, I'll pause for dramatic effects. But it might actually crush your soul, because you really thought people are going to want this, people are going to want to do this, and so on and so forth. But then you realize that is not what people wanted, or that wasn't the right time, or you have to think about it differently. But this is where emotional intelligence comes in. This is where growth mindset comes in, because it allows you to reflect on how this is going to help you develop and be better, as opposed to look at it as this is a complete failure and why did I even bother trying. So just keeping these things in mind. So it's very, very important that it was very important for me to bring this message forward, and I hope it gave you value. I hope it gave you a different perspective on what what it's like to be an entrepreneur. And I hope you can find an entrepreneur in every single one of you. And I really do believe we all have it, and it's not something super special that you have to be born with a certain genetic makeup to be an entrepreneur. I really just think some of us have the only difference between one entrepreneur and the other, or one person and the other that tries to do something on their own, is that one person might feel like, you know what, it scares the heck out of me, but I'm going to do it anyways. I'm going to try it anyways. So it's just, I hope that if any of you here are hoping to start something on their own, and they're hoping to be an entrepreneur or start their own business or whatnot, I do pray and I do hope that this message gives you that push. In order to be able to become the entrepreneur and actualize and see your dream come true. Having on that final note, I wish you the best, and remember to always, always, always be beautifully unfit, and always challenge the narrative in your mind. Make things work for you, and don't force yourself into a blueprint. I wish you all the best and have a wonderful day. Bye.